So can I just introduce that I'm talking to Sean McGuire. What's the name of your programme?
It's called Out of the Bag.
Out of the Bag in Ireland. I think Sean lives in Galway, and it's a privilege to talk to him again. It's about a year since we last talked, and I've had quite a tough year, and I've been all over the place, but the things I've learned are absolutely horrendous. The families that were in charge of the world 2,000 years ago are still in charge, and I've become an expert on genealogy. And if you go to the front page of my website, you'll see that the Queen is descended from the false Bible author. That's the Queen in England, and that's the reason that she did not lay the poppy wreaths this year, because she is a direct descendant from Papyrii, who was the wife of Nero, and he was murdered by the Piso man that faked up the Bible.
And what makes it different, George? Because I mean, she has laid the wreath in previous years.
It's just that I've put the heat on them so much now. Yeah, on the front page of that website you see the bloodline that takes you down from the Bible authors and into the royal family, and there are about 5 or 6 Charlemagne, the serial killer in the Pagan cull all across Europe, is the father of all the surviving European monarchies. So he's the launch of the massive imperialist France, and that is the Carolingian dynasty. And because I've become such an expert in genealogy, I'm very grateful to David Icke and the bloodlines that he's published all over the internet, and that takes you, right through the Queen's bloodline on one of the branches, and it takes you into Franklin D. Roosevelt and George W. Bush's bloodline in the American presidents, and it's absolutely fascinating to learn it. Even the Dimblebees that give you the news every cenotaph day, they are just a cover for the Thimblebees that are on the American presidential bloodlines. Just absolutely crooked. And what I'm looking at now is I discovered yesterday that the wife of Piso who faked up the Bible in Naples, and if you look at the front page of my website, you'll see that the Naples events that occurred, they were let me just see if I can get that on this computer that's in front of me. Okay. So on the front page of my website, you'll see that the man who faked the Bible is the basis for the naming of global law enforcement. His name was Piso, and he is the basis for the naming of the police globally, and the pistols that they use, and that's why until this news comes out we cannot really have anything approaching civilization. That's Lord Condon and every one of the metropolitan police leaders that have been involved in the massive scams against the people for centuries now, and the polis name goes right into Greece and the ancient civilizations, and it is absolutely tragic that we live that way. But what I discovered yesterday is that the families that are related to the Greek Olympian movement is a massive display that the elite families have taken charge of that, and they were led by a man called Baron Coubertin, and what I found out yesterday about him is quite stunning. So when you look at his bloodline, that's the Olympics. The reason I was looking at it was because I try and interpret everything that I learn about that I do not understand already. So in the 12 Days of Christmas song, you've got 5 golden rings for the 5th day of Christmas.
Yes.
And that is the Olympic symbol. So I began to look at who was the founder of the Olympic movement, and it's not really all that old, but it's a man called de Coubertin, and I've got his bloodline here on Genie in front of me on the big screen, and he amazingly is from a place called Calvados in Normandy. That is where the Dukes of Northumberland are from. That is where Hillary Clinton is from. That is where Tom Hanks is from. That is where Shaniah Twain is from. And all of them are in that same elite lethal bloodline. That's the Duke of Northumberland, who was Perseus the poet in the Roman court 2,000 years ago. They're the Perseus of Alnwick, and that is the making of the Harry Potter movies in Alnwick Castle. And the owners of Alnwick Castle, before the Perseus and the Dukes of Northumberland took it over, they were the Deveschi family that turned out to be the Vestes of Argentina, and they are also the Vaz family. If you watch the Gladiator movie,
the Vestes, they own Dewhurst and all the butchers. And
that's it. They stomped off in World War I so that they could be safe, and they joined the fascists in Latin America, and I think their main base was Argentina, and that is their massive empire of butchery. But they have land holdings in the north coast of Scotland in a place bizarrely called Sutherland, and that is where the Duchess of Sutherland also has her massive mansions, and that is the Duchess that sent the colonists to the colonies for stealing bread and made room for the sheep. She now lives in the Borders, right next to my hometown. And they are on all the Jewish policy study committees, and I've got the whole thing dissected now, and all I need is an audience that has got the courage to let it out. And I'm really grateful to you. Can you tell your audience about the things that I told you about in the little snippets before we agreed that you would ring in at the back of 9? Yeah. So what's happened in America? So the name of this family, that are the de Coubertins, they are the Bonaventures, and that is the Bona woman. Her name was, it's all on David Icke's bloodlines, but she is the great granddaughter of Julius Caesar, and Piso had him murdered for his decency, and that's the Night of the Long Knives, and that is the murdering of one of their greatest emperors, and he wanted to give the proceeds of the Roman Empire back to the Roman people, but in the end it went the other way, and within 150 years the whole of that empire was almost dismantled again, because that is the incursions by the Goths and the Visigoths. And guess what their other name is in German history?
No.
They are the Dietrich Herules tribes. Yeah, have you heard of Marlena?
Yes, Marlena Dietrich.
I think everyone will have heard of her. And now I've made videos like this with Jim Fetzer, and two of Jim Fetzer's friends on his listings are Dietrichs. It's absolutely fabulous, and that is the folk that sacked Rome in 150 AD, and that was the Dark Ages, and the Pisos, had just, the Arrius Piso is the most powerful man in the world, and that is the template that Donald is now using for corrupted globalism. And the irony of the Piso plan is that when you look at David Icke's bloodline for the Piso-Windsor-Bush bloodline on the internet, you'll see that Arrius Piso comes below King Herod, who was at that for quite a long time in Rome helping the Pisos to write the Bible, and that is the man that in the Bible story condemned Jesus to death, and Jesus never lived. It's the biggest joke in world history, and that is why they tried to section me as a professor of drug science when I became a political activist, and I came back, and the man that tried to section me was the governor of the local school that my kids were attending, and he trained as a policeman before he trained as a doctor. It's absolutely sick, and I'll tell you his name so that the whole world can shame him. He's Dr. Ian Fingland, the school governor at Kelso High School, just a couple of years before he tried to section me for my innocence and insight into this great scam that means that the Queen is in the serial killing families that have been in charge of that world and have launched every sectarian division that the world's ever known. That's the launch of all the different Christian denominations. It's a massive divide and conquer tool, and Piso also wrote the Quran, and that's why Pope Benedict resigned, and I've made videos with John Patterson on this. Pope Benedict was the chair of the Committee for Interreligious Studies that were rewriting the Bible, the Talmud and the Quran all at the same time, and every one of the delegates who went to Rome to participate in that in the Vatican, they got £10,000 per trip. It's absolutely ruthless, and that's why George Bush's son, they are given the names of the Israeli chosen ones. And we talked a little bit about who was the Irish woman who got involved in the... She was
Mary Robertson.
Yes. So her middle name is Bean, and that is the Bean Israeli. She is in the tribes of the chosen ones that go back to King David. It's absolutely
incredible. Listen, I've got people in the chat room and People's Internet Radio saying, Sean, do tell George we are very grateful that he is speaking.
Yeah, well, I mean, I realise that the Irish guys have had a really rough deal, but because of that divide and conquer thing, it sort of explains how Ireland was split. And, you know, the launch of the global Freemasons, there's a massive part of that is the Battle of the Boyne, and I think it was William of Orange that was involved there. So from there, that was the launch of Freemasonry in Ireland, and it becomes a really powerful tool for all the folk that are in the Masons, which is like an SS operation. They now run the world's wealthiest banks. That's the P2 banks, like Santander and the HSBC empire. All of that was set up by David Cameron, and David Cameron was forced to resign by me and Patterson and the likes because of the evidence that we published. Yeah, he ran the Chipping Norton set, and that is, my wife's in the Chipping Norton set, which is why I've had such a rough time. She's the one that tried to have me sectioned, yeah, because she trained in intel with MI6 and MI5, and everywhere we went around the world she introduced me to the MI5 and MI6 agents, and all of them were totally decrepit. Many of them were psychologically or psychiatrically unhinged, and that does not surprise me at all. Now, I believe in God, but Jesus is the biggest fake in world history, and that's why, you know, Madonna's husband is Penn, the speaker at the house, at the White House in America is Boner, and all of them are in that ancient bloodline. The Boners are the females of Piso, and that is the launch of the Iona. So her name was Bona Iona, and that is the launch of the monastery for the Knights that say Ni, between Scotland and Ireland, and all of it leads to all that Celtic Ranger stuff and the troubles that you guys have had. And Gordon Bowden and I released all the names and all the director numbers. Martin McGuinness died within 6 weeks of me making a video on his middle name, which is Pacelli. That's the papal bloodlines for Piso.
Is this basically in every country on this globe that the Piso family has somehow grasped it and taken over, or is it just the Western world? Well,
that's the 5 Olympic rings are the 5 continents. They own the whole lot. Right. And that's why there's an Arnie Schwarzenegger lookalike making videos about unspoilt Antarctica. That is the 6th continent, and that is already carved up. They pretend that it's not, but all of it is in the hands of those elite families. I've got
a question here from Elmont321 in the chat room saying, please tell us more about Mary Robinson. I've always had a feeling about her for many, many years.
Well, I believe it's just an ancient Freemasonic joke. Do you believe in the occult and the capacity of the humans to read the future?
I do, personally.
So do I now. I would never have said that when I was a scientist. It would have probably have gotten me the sack. But now I totally believe it, that they can predict what's going to happen. And every time I find something on the internet, it's already been published on the news. And all the details that you get, it's just amazing how that happens.
Mary was in the Club of Rome, of course, and under UNICEF as well.
Oh yeah, and she was very close to a Canadian female president too, but I can't remember her name. If you look up Mary Robinson and George Lees and Martin McGuinness, you'll find the video it lasts for 1 hour and 10 minutes, and all of the story is told in there. I think the beginning of it is every one of those Christian jokes. So the 5th day of Christmas is those 5 gold rings for the Olympics. Baron de Coubertin is the launch of the Olympics, and the story I was going to tell you is that the father of Bonaventure Julien de Freddy de Coubertin, the mother is a woman called Caroline Depardieu. Yeah, do you get it? That is Gerard Depardieu, who was one of my favourite actors, because I'm a socialist, and I thought that he was a rabid revolutionary. He played Danton in the revolution, but he's now the tax exile who fled to Russia, and that's because they know that I'm going to come along and tell that story. And it's just amazing. So that is the 5 Olympic rings for the ownership of the world joke, the 5 great continents, and that is Asia, and that is the massive 200 years opium war that was run in the name of, that it's the British and the Rothschild family and the Sassoons that then married into the Rothschilds, that ran the opium into China to dismember its peoples. It's really, really tragic. And it's when you find these things out, it just all piles up. And when I talked to Jim Fetzer about 3 weeks ago, he was completely astounded with my knowledge base. All the terror events, and I believe that would include all the Irish ones.
Well, it hasn't stopped here in Ireland. We are poisoned. Just as the Chinese population is massive, of course.
Well, that's a mental division. Is that what you mean? You've been separated?
No. In the Republic of Ireland, we have fluorosilicic acid put into our water systems, which should dumb us down to make sure that we're not rebels. And it also, in generations, it stops people being able to give birth. It's sterilizing the generations ahead. It's mass culling of our nation, and it's going on now, right now.
Well, as a pharmacologist and toxicologist, I don't really believe in any of that. I believe that it's there to frighten the people, but when I tell you about the motives for all of the terror events, it's just an extension of that, and the paedophilia is used in the same way. So what you've got is, do you understand why the Barcelona terror occurred?
Not fully. Enlighten me.
I published the week that the Barcelona terror occurred that Shimon Peres was the longest lived president in Israel. He died, I think, in 2015, and every one of the fascists that lead our world were at his funeral. And Perez and that bloodline, they have a massive set of post-war art galleries for the treasures, and the Perez treasures are in Spain, they're in Portugal, and they're all over fascist Latin America. And that's been published on my website for years already. But what happened that week that the Barcelona terror occurred, I discovered that Lionel Perez, who's my favourite footballer in the world, he plays for Barcelona Football Club. He is in the Perez bloodlines.
Do you mean Lionel Messi?
Messi, sorry, yeah. Yeah, that's what sparked the terror. And one of my favourite singers is Shakira. She is an out-and-out fascist. Do you know what our name was when she was born into this world?
No, go on.
She is a Mubarak. Have you heard of Mubarak in the Egyptian fascism?
Yeah, it goes way, way back though.
Yeah, that's right. And he got $2 billion in USAID from Hillary Clinton as the foreign secretary at that time. And she's from Normandy, where the Dukes of Northumberland are from, where this family that launched the Olympics are from, and where the massive William the Conqueror story was launched from. And that is the have you heard of Terry Gilliam?
Yeah, the Monty Python artist.
Oh, God bless you. So he's tried to make, dozens of times, he's tried to make movies on the Don Quixote theme.
Okay.
And do you understand what Don Quixote's mission is?
Again, you're going to have to enlighten me on that one.
So this is the story that the Piso Bible has written the gods that created us all out of world history and biblical, biblical storytelling. So Don Quixote's mission is to charge at the giants that are now the name of the gods in the heavens that created us and give us all our pathologies. And it's a really dangerous thing to do. Every time he tries to make that movie with human actors, a member of the cast drops dead.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, maybe being an artist, he can do it all animation.
Well, that's what they've resorted to now. That's the chicken run stories and all the movies that cover up the lethal families that are in that Carolingian bloodline. And before them, it was the Capet family, and it was my mother who told me this, but a Capet is a chicken, and that is the massive Capetan dynasty, and I believe that Donald's relatives and ancestors are in it. Donald dodged the draft for Vietnam, but he was already at the rank of a captain in the US Army. It's absolute. Did you know that?
I knew that he had dodged drafting, and I've also seen him in military uniform. So
yeah. So he was a captain, but as soon as the shit hits the fan, he is immune from risk, and he's from the Palatinate in Germany, which is where the false Christmas story was launched. And I'd love to tell the whole of Ireland that story.
Please tell the Christmas story, please.
Okay, so the reason that Oprah Winfrey is going to run for president in the next election is that they are an intimate part of the Christmas story. I would love to keep up to date with images on this for my own audience, but I'm going to have to do that at a later date. So
this is just an audio radio show, George.
So the whole of European history is about culling the pagans that were the indigenous people. So when you look at the bloodlines for I think I can find that page. Let me just see. So Thor's oak is the icon for the execution of every pagan that ever lived in Europe. So the oak tree is an icon for the Ing family from Sweden, who were the biggest killers in the 30 Years Holy War all across Europe. And that takes you right into Italy, and the whole of the religious fraction. The longest lived religious war was the Ghibellines versus the Guelphs, and that is the Holy Roman German emperors led by Barbarossa and all those German families in the Austro-Hungarian Valley, and they were fighting against the papacy in Italy. That's the elf families, and that is the Guelphs. And the Justin Welby was a director at the Elf Oil Company, and he's now the Archbishop of Canterbury. It's totally corrupted, and he is the son of Winston Churchill's private secretary. And Winston Churchill's Blenheim has more oak trees for the pagan cull than any other structure in the world. And on the colours of every Nazi uniform in World War II, can you guess what was there?
An oak tree.
An oak leaf. And Hitler was a Rothschild, and Stalin was a Rothschild, and all of it have now got their bloodline trees, and almost all of them use the middle name Alois before they become a world leader in one of those great conflicts. So Hitler was sired by Alois Hitler, and that was in a mansion in Austria, and the name of the maid in the mansion, can you guess from The Sound of Music?
Maria.
Good lad, you've got it. You are in a position now to almost tie all the divided religions together. Yeah, it's just a massive fucking piss take. And that so the Rothschilds' hunting lodge in the Ibs Valley, that is Hibs, the football club in Edinburgh, run by Rob Petrie, who's on Longshanks's bloodline. Yeah. And he is the man that sent me into exile, because he played the role of the sheriff in the Selkirk court. After they had jailed me overnight, Rob Petrie was the sheriff in my case, and he told me that if I did not fuck off out of the region, that I would be in jail for a whole week till I could get another hearing. And that is the point in my life when I started to live in safe houses all around the country. And I'm really grateful to my hosts in those issues, and it's totally corrupted. What was I telling you before I got to Rob Petrie?
Well, we were talking about the oak leaf.
Oh yeah, so the pagan cull is just massive. The spread. Have you heard of the Spread Eagle Financial Services Company?
Oh, I haven't heard of the financial services company, but go ahead.
So the Spread Eagle is the other way. They either hung them or they burned them under the oak trees, but the torturous method of doing it was called the Spread Eagle or the Angel's Wings. And what they do there is that the fully conscious prisoner that they have taken from the pagan lands was laid on a table like Braveheart, yeah, with his back facing upwards. The ribs were broken open and the lungs were pulled through and hung out the back as the angel's wings. And the victim of that did not die suddenly, they suffocated to death. And it is just absolutely horrendous that can happen. And that's you know, I'm totally a pacifist and I would never resort to violence. And everything that you've got that is violence and terror on the telly is just a fake up by Rupert Murdoch. The head of Police Scotland that's now in trouble for bullying his force is just a cover for, he's a Gormley, and there are dozens of Gormleys on the Murdoch boards. Do you remember the serial killing, the massive panic attacks that occurred when the young boy was killed in Liverpool? His name was Bolger. There are dozens of Bolgers on the Rothschild and the Murdoch directorates. It is total corruption. And Stephen House, who was the predecessor for Philip Gormley, he is descended from 7 members of the Mayflower passenger families. And Elvis is in a similar position. I can't remember how many of the Mayflower passengers are related to him. So when I learned that Jimmy Nail's middle name was Alois, you then look them up on Wikipedia and you discover that Jimmy Nail is just a total stage name for that man. He is a Bradford, and that was Billy Bradford on the Mayflower. That's Jimmy Nail in that comedy from Newcastle, and almost all of the cast members have died already. And none of it surprised me. The only one, there are several still left alive, and one of them is the man that played the Birmingham guy,
Timothy Spall.
That's right, and he had a near-death cancer for a while, and he had the temerity to play Churchill in the Stammering King movie that won the Oscar. And that's the Stammering King that was the chief master mason for this country at that time. And he made a perfect speech without speech therapy at the Ibrox Stadium that is Rangers ground, and that was the Empire exhibition 2 years before war was declared. And the whole of it is a Freemasonic nightmare, and every one of the gods now appear in the cast of the movie. So the speech therapist was Log, and that is the joke, that is Loki is the Norse god of humour and mischief. Yeah, and all of it, the Thor's hammer has been stolen, and for Thor to get it back he had to dress up as his sister Freya, and that is now getting us close to Oprah Winfrey, who's in the family that launched the cutting down of Thor's oak in Frankfurt and the replacement of that oak tree with the pi pyramidal pine tree that becomes the Christmas tree. Yeah, and
okay, so now we're getting back to the Christmas story.
That's it. So that's in a place called Fitzlar in Germany. It's 30 kilometres from Frankfurt, the home for Rothschilds and the 5 Arrows family that launched every war and funded every side in every war. And I've made dozens of videos for, and I
be the banking cartels, George.
Yeah, that's it. They are also from the Austrian nobility. They did not change their name at all. They were Rothschild there. They were Rothschild in the Frankfurt ghetto. And what I've discovered about the Frankfurt ghetto families is that it's just horrendous. Almost all the cabinet members around the world are from that place, and they are almost all Forbes rich listers, actors and actresses, singers, and it is just horrendous. And even in the cemetery here in Dundee that is full of ordinary working men, it's got the same people, the Lows and several of the other families that are in the Frankfurt Mafia. And that is the irony, that they present that as a place where they were poor and bullied. They now live in Palm Beach with Donald. It's and that is the Seligmans, the Felix families, and the whole lot of them. Even I was a close friend of Andrew Carrington Hitchcock, and I was very grateful to him because he's the man that told me about the Opium War and the involvement of Sassoon before he married.
He was a guest on my show, and I was also a guest on his show.
Well, he was my Facebook friend for ages and ages and ages, but when you discover that Rabbi Hitchcock is in the Frankfurt ghetto and is in the chosen ones for that diaspora that Mary Robinson has made. It is just absolutely stunning. Michael Caine's in it. I'm a Fugitive Now. The Von Kimballs are in it. Yeah, that's Richard Kimball and all the movies that were made by Harris.
Fugitive.
Yeah, so he was Kimball in the movie. He was supposed to have murdered his wife, and that is the prosthetic limb story. My son has just graduated in mechanical engineering, and he's designing prosthetic limbs. It's just astounding, and that's nothing to do with me. I have no influence over any of my kids now after what my wife from Chipping Norton has done. And her brother has totally asset stripped his own profession, and that's what she worked in when she pretends that she was already separated from me physically in my home.
Were you ever asked to work for MI5,
Me?
Yeah.
No, she trained with Marks and Spencer's, which is the hub for Stella Remington, and that's the MI5 syndicate, and Manningham Buller's the boss at MI6 now, and every one of those sinister figures then becomes an academic, and they're now stealing from all the kids that got their education free in their generation. So I got right up to professor without ever being in debt, and now for the 4 years honours degree that I got for nothing at Heriot-Watt University in Edinburgh, it now costs £70,000 in David Cameron's England.
Wow.
And all of that, you know, I was lobbying on that through all of the campaign, and that is their weakest point. That was run by the Rothschild Bank, and my MP, Michael Moore, who was the Secretary of State for Scotland, was put in charge of that because he was a Lib Dem, and Nick Clegg and he declared before the election that Cameron won and had to form the coalition with them. He said that the Lib Dems would never ever make students pay for their education in England, and that was the case right up to 1995, and then it became 3,000 a year, and now it's I think it's about 13,000 a year. The net cost for the 4-year product is 70,000 quid, and if you've got 3 kids like me, and all of them chose university, and all of that is favoured by your woman who works for the government and works in Intel, it is total catastrophe. And she's a very intelligent woman. She's got almost perfect memory, and it is just absolutely cynical. So what our brother does, he's an OBE, and everybody that I report for crimes of that nature, it's not really a crime, but what they're doing now is selling the right to work. It's a thing called CPD, which in the Kimball movie is the Chicago Police Department, but here it is continuing professional development, and it means that every professional in our world has to pay around about 250 to 300 quid to retain the right to work, and the whole lot of it goes to the British Royals, because it's the Royal Pharmaceutical Society now, it's the Royal Dental Society, it's the Royal College of Medicine, and that's why they've got in every one of the counties that the monarchy owns all across the fucking globe. It's not just here. Remember, I lived in New Zealand for nearly a decade. The whole of that land is in Queenie's hands still. It's just
disgusting, isn't it?
Absolutely terrible, and Ireland's been the victim of that. I've been looking again at the Churchill family are all through the aristocracy world, and one of them married into my local landlord's family, and that was Emily Churchill, and she is one of 5 or 6 sisters, and that was at the time when Ireland was being coerced into World War I, and I think to get your lot into the war, they had to commit the Croke Park massacre. And what they've done since I reported all of that and gave the details of it, so little Emily Churchill, who became the Duchess of Roxburgh, she launched the Mauritania. And that is the same joke as the Olympic rings, because that is them taking over Mauritania and the steppes of Russia so that they can get all the oil wealth. And that was Churchill that was in charge of it. And Churchill was in charge at Gallipoli, and he botched the campaign deliberately just to get the numbers down. And the joke about that is that Rowan Atkinson opened the London Olympics playing Chariots of Fire, the joke that you must not run for your country on a Sunday because Jesus never lived, and we're having a little laugh at that. But that Mr. Bean, that is the role that Rowan Atkinson was playing on that organ for the religious fraud, Mr. Charles Bean was the war correspondent for Gallipoli.
Well, do you know what? Rowan Atkinson, I've got something in common with him, is that I had the same drama teacher.
All right.
That's actually, yeah.
What was his name?
Mr. Oh my God, I'm 52 now. What was his name? I can see him. I can see him. He's got a mole.
Because Blackadder, it's a prevalent. It's all over Dundee. They've got Blackadder lawyers, and the first Blackadder to become famous in Scotland was the first female graduate at St Andrews.
I can remember his name. It's Mr. Elgood.
All right.
Mr. Elgood. That's it.
I think that's in one of the comedies that is a joke against the gods.
Okay.
So if you go right back to the top of the Queen's bloodline, you find a character called Lagos the Rabbit of Macedonia, and that is the Winston Churchill bunny ear sign. And that is
not the Victory V.
So Lagos is actually Iago, and that is Santiago. And do you know what that translates as a biblical joke?
Saint something or other.
St John. Yeah. And that is the Santiago football boots that I wore all through my career. And that is one of the biggest Freemasonic jokes in the world, that Santiago, Lagos was married to, what is the famous, when the Police sing the song about Roxanne. So Santiago and Roxanne are right up at the top of the Queen's bloodline, just above Alexander the Great of Macedonia, and that takes you right back into 250 or 90 BC. And when you come down the bloodlines, you find, before you get to Piso, you find Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, and they are in love, remember, with Cleopatra. Cleopatra is the seventh of the Cleopatras, and they are married to the Egyptian kings. When an Egyptian king dies, he gets wrapped in bandages, becomes a mummy, goes into the pyramidal pine tree like pyramid, and then he becomes a god. And in the Beano and the Dandy, that becomes Dennis the Menace, and all of the characters that are the Egyptian kings and gods. One of them is Mutt, that is Shaniah Twain's husband for a decade, that in that decade God took her voice away, and she was not able to sing. Yeah, the same thing happened to Julie Andrews, who played Maria in the Rothschilds' hunting lodge. When the time, that is the massive joke, that when the Archduke was killed. Do you know where he was killed? In Sarajevo.
Okay.
No, I don't. He was killed on a thing called the Hume Bridge, and that is the Humes that are the philosophers and my neighbours in the borders. That is Sir Alex Douglas Home that carpet bombed the Garden of Eden for the BP oil wealth, and Winston Churchill, smoking the Piso pipe as one of the Bilderberg founders and a false socialist, he followed up with further carpet bombing of the Garden of Eden, which is Aden, which is the BP plant, which is now INEOS, and the INEOS pay round, they totally refused to give the people at Grangemouth a pay rise, and INEOS is the inscription on Jesus' cross. In my feudal landlord's mansion, it is the middle name for my feudal landlord, and he has now locked his gates and will not let the public walk in there since I started to tell the story. Yet that is he and Anne Gloag, who is Scotland's richest woman. She is the sister of a suitor, and that is the Soters of the Egyptian bloodlines, and everybody that was in charge then is still in charge now. And the Bushes are from Rome, which is why their home in Maine is called Vesuvius. And when I told Jim Fetzer that, he stammered a bit. He said, no, that's the Kennedys' home. And I said, no, it's not. I've got it, and the picture of it is right in front. He said, oh, you're right. Kennedy's home is something else. And he, with all the information stacking up, so George W. Bush's mother is Barbara Pierce. That is the Percys of Alnwick Castle and Shimon Perez. All of them in the same bloodlines.
Does this go back to like 120 BC?
Absolutely. When that was the year when they were running the mint, were the Piso Frugi family, and the output of the mint was a picture. In Scotland, we've got, in Loch Ness, there's alleged to be Kelpies, which is the Loch Ness monster story. And the Kelpies are on one side of the coins, and in some of the coins the donkey is on the coin, and that for the Piso family is Jesus in the Bible, and that for your Irish mate that is my favourite singer. Every song that I loved is now a joke about Jesus replacing the gods that I now love as a pagan. Yeah, I was a Catholic altar boy, but now that I understand the history of the world and the culling of all those indigenous peoples on every land that God planted them on, yeah, it is totally tragic, and it brings tears to my eyes every day. And when you learn the Christmas joke, which I've still not told you, it is absolutely...
I thought you were going to go down the Val Doonican route then.
Well, so that's right. So Val Doonican sings Delaney's Donkey. That is Franklin Delano Roosevelt's joke about the whole lot of us dying in those wars that are sparked for religious and ethnic hatred. Yeah, and that is the war that was World War I, was in the Archduke's hunting lodge. Yeah, on the Hume Bridge he was murdered, and 1 year before that his son, who was the successor, who could never take over because he was murdered in the hunting lodge that after the Archduke was killed became the Rothschild property. And you would not think that in this day and age, or even then back in 1910 or whenever it was, 1914, sorry, that you could get away with something so heinous. But because they own the press, because they own the police, because they own the intel, yeah, and because they've got the pigeon post that allowed them to take over the Bank of England and the stock market from Waterloo onwards. Waterloo is exactly 200 years before the Scottish referendum freedom joke was launched. Can you guess what it was 300 years behind?
Go on.
The cull of the Scots and the French Freemasons at Culloden, and Odin is one of the Norse gods. And all of them think that they have replaced, as the orca-fat Winston Churchill and the decrepit Prince Philip and the likes, that they are the gods that are in charge of the whole of the universe. And that's why Prince Philip is the most sensible one of the lot. He bailed out months and months ago when this story was beginning to take shape. And since the Star Wars teams started to die, it's really become a panic for them all. Yeah, that's Carrie Fisher, that's Von Fischer in the Austrian nobility, and her mum died the same week.
Yes.
And now when you look at the obituary pages, it's just amazing. So Superman, he was also a Bradford. He was a Reeves, and that is the Reeveses that Reeves means sheriff, and the man that was Reeves, he was the boss at the towers that were burnt in London. What were they called again?
The towers?
Yeah.
I'm not sure what they were called.
It's in Notting Hill, and it's the Grenfell Tower.
Oh, the Grenfell Tower.
Yeah.
Right, so I was trying to go back in history.
So that is just cover for the Grenfell Morgan banking group, and Christopher Reeves was one of their first CEOs. Christopher Reeves' family that played Superman, he ended up in a wheelchair, totally paraplegic. He made a movie called The Remains of the Day, where he wanted to professionalise warfare. Yeah, and he broke his back on a Piso horse. The horse is the icon for the Piso family, which is why I intend to be at Kelso races this weekend. Yeah, every race course, every golf course, they form in a complex in the same region. And I've made videos on the oldest golf course in the world, which is in a place called Leiden in Holland, and it was the Lonen course. And in my hometown of Kelso, there's a public walkway right through the middle of the golf course and the race course, and it's called the Lonen. Yeah, and that is the syndicate of Freemasons that spark every war. And I believe that my wife is in the bloodlines for Oswald Mosley, that was married to the Mitford women in World War II, and Oswald Mosley was unfit for duty like Donald in Vietnam, so he ran the War Office for 60,000 non-combatants working in Piso pinstripe suits. It's totally sickening. And all of the family that died recently, Max Clifford, yeah, the whole lot of them are in a panic. Max Clifford ran fascist orgies. He is related to the Duke of Northumberland from Normandy, and all of it is the same story. Yeah, that's a place called Calvados, and that is one of the elite spirits from the French region. Hillary Clinton's from there. The Canadian presidents are related to her and to Shaniah, and that is Chrétien and Trudeau. They're all in the same fucking bloodlines, and they're still stealing from the world. And when God finds that out, there's a really quick exit route for them, which is why Prince Philip packed up when he did, and why Prince Charles had to lay the poppy wreath this time. I made videos on the Duke of Westminster. His sister is my feudal landlord's first wife. She's Lady Jane Grosvenor, and that is Gerald Grosvenor, that was the Duke of Westminster, who owns Mayfair and all those massive properties on the Monopoly board. His deviant line for a money stream was being the boss at the British Legions all over the world. Yeah, that's profiting from the poppy funds like Butcher Haig used to do in my local region. And the Haigs are the relatives of my very first girlfriends in that region. It's totally corrupted, and so much of it upsets you so much. When
you're seeing it, and that's the thing, you're seeing it and you're living.
Well, yeah, when you've lived with it and you've seen them as your friends through all of your life, it's now total desertion. None of my students except one will speak to me now. She's in Las Vegas, and I spoke to her just this week. But the others are in mafia families, and I've only just learned that. You remember Cavendish was a member of the Great Escape team?
Okay. So
Cavendish and Blackett and Errington are all families that are in the mafias in Newcastle. That you know, and I thought many of my students that went to New Zealand with me were from Newcastle, and they used to tell me that I was their greatest influence in life. But now that I realise that Adam Errington will not speak to me, his mother was an administrator for P&O, the shipping line, and my MP, Michael Moore, Secretary of State for Scotland, had 82 for-profit directorates with P&O, and his co-director was a man called George W. Bush, who lives in Vesuvius in Maine. Yeah, and that is the P&O shipping line. Can you guess what that is named after?
P&O?
Yeah.
Poseidon?
No.
No.
A man called Piso. Beginning and end, the world belongs to him. Yeah, that is me as a Catholic altar boy on the Catholic Paschal candle every Easter for the non-existent Jesus. The second coming, by the way, is in the bedroom, and some of the stories are really, really ruthless and sleazy. Yeah, so on the Paschal candle you have a horseshoe-shaped symbol, and at the bottom of the horseshoe you have Alpha to Omega. Can you guess what that is? That's the beginning and the end of the world. It's Arrius Piso, Alpha to Omega, and on it goes. On every zebra crossing, when it lights up, yes, so the zebra is the wild ass, and is the asses are the names of the coins from the Piso mints, 120 BC. And it's really upsetting.
Are those mints the same as the Fed and all the banks now?
Well, I remember the first time I talked to you, I was interested in Galway, because one of the mints in the Republic of Ireland was at Galway, and you didn't know anything about it at all. And
No.
I think you then informed me that you'd already joined the Eurozone, so it could not possibly make a difference now. But you know, the whole
original mint, I was told, was, and I think I told you this before, was down in Waterford.
Oh yeah. And which county is that?
That's Waterford County.
So George Osborne, he is an Irishman, and his estates are way down where we were the night that Ireland got knocked out the World Cup, when Jackie Charlton was the boss.
Okay.
They were in the quarter-finals of the World Cup, and I think it was Italy that beat them. You've never seen a bigger party, and we were in a town called Kinsale then.
County Kerry.
Yeah, and George Osborne's mansion is just along the road.
Well, no, Kinsale is County Cork. What am I talking about?
Oh, that's it, Cork. Yeah, that's right. That's where we got the ferry to.
Yeah. I was mixing up. Kinsale is in Cork.
So let me see if I can tell you and focus on the Christmas story.
Okay, Before you do, George, can I ask a few questions? And it's obviously means that you might be digressing and coming back to the Christmas story in a little while.
Yeah.
But I've been ignoring the questions in the chat room. Okay. And if I go back to them, there was one in particular that says something about cryptocurrencies and what you think of them. Let me see. Oh yeah, will cryptocurrencies be the undoing of Freemasonry and corruption? What is George's views?
I've never really heard of a cryptocurrency. Is that the what were the thingaby coins?
Yeah, Bitcoin.
Yeah. I think it's all just when you learn that you remember that there was a healthcare issue that Obama addressed, and the man that addressed it for him in America, the cost of healthcare, his name was Donald Berwick, and that is the launch of the false terror that was done by Breivik in Norway. Yeah, absolutely coincident with the Obamacare incident, and that's why I'm telling you about the Val Doonican is just cover for Val Duncan, who was the CEO at Rio Tinto, which is in Rothschild hands for years and years and years before the Hancock family took it over, and my wife's name is Hancock's. And you know, it's all just a massive Rothschild syndicate, and that's why the man that's Lord Carrick and Lockhart, he's in charge of Rio Tinto. The Duplessis of South Africa, they're on the boards, and Donald's on the boards of 2 of the 4 big oil companies. So I've kind of skipped the question, but every one of the great banking crashes, all the names, all the elite families that are on that, I've dissected them. Many are on the Rothschild payroll, and many of them, none of them get brought to justice. Fred Goodwin is the joke that the Godwins were either from Norway or Normandy in the Norman conquest. They're coming from both sides, and it is totally tragic that so Goodwin is Godwin, and all the folk that appear on the TV programs on the telly, and many of them have the word Piso in their name, like the Have I Got News For You star that John Patterson was completely thrilled to be talking to. What was his name again?
I don't know.
Yeah, but he's got the word Piso in his name, like John Prescott. Yeah, and all of it, you know, they're totally decrepit to look at them now, but they're all descended from that lethal bloodline, and that was Prescott, the false socialist, who brutalised the Holy Lands, you know, so that Tony Blair could become the envoy to the Middle East. So I've skipped that question, but all the banking crashes are totally premeditated, and Gordon Bowden and I have made dozens of videos on all of that, and if you look up Lord Charles Guthrie, he was NATO's army leader in the Balkans. He worked for the NM Rothschild Bank for 20 years. Tony Blair gave him his lordship. He's on the Jewish Policy Committee studies, and all the folk that he steals from the world with are lords and ladies and this, that and the other, and many of them are generals and rabbis. Yeah, and the Pope is just as corrupted. The Pope Francis, he gave confession to the serial killers in Latin America that were involved in the massacres that were Operation Condor and the Caravan of Death genocides, and that's why they've made him already a Charlemagne Prize winner. Charlemagne Prize winners are for the world's biggest killers. Tony Blair's got it, George W. Bush has got it, his dad's got it. He's George Herbert Poppy Bush because of that link to Papyrii. And all the Polish...
I'm going to cut across you there, George, just for a second. Laurie is asking this, and it's quite a big question. Why is this guest still alive when they may know he is sharing their info?
Well, they tried to kill me by lobotomy, and that is the sectioning of a person who was on for 3 years before he left New Zealand, the drug safety panels for the South Pacific. Yeah, so I'm an expert on drug safety, and as soon as I turned on Queenie and the illegitimacy of her bloodline and the siring of 9 of Queen Victoria's babies were sired by Rothschilds, all of them bastards, every one of them sent into the monarchy all across Europe to launch World War I and then World War II. It is absolutely ruthless, and I will never stop doing what I'm doing until I get the bullet in the head.
Well, we're all here until we're dead, so...
Well, because it's all been published, and I shame at every opportunity now, every one of those folk that have deserted me, with the exception of my pharmacy mentor. It completely stunned me that that lady died of a lethal cancer, but when you learn that she is in the Cavendish and Blackett mafias with the Erringtons of P&O, it is just a massive syndicate of lethal and family mafia groups that have been in charge of the world for 2,000 plus years. And when you look at that, you then understand that that is the loaves and fishes joke in the Bible. So Queen Victoria's first baby was legitimate. It was sired by a man called Blind Prince George of Cumbria and Teviotdale, and Teviotdale joins the River Tweed in my hometown, and that's the most expensive fishery in the world. Costs a vast fortune for a week's fishing when the fishing is at its height, and that was owned by the Millers of Alnwick, and all of them go right back into ancient Rome.
Yeah. Well, BC, and you're saying that Christ didn't even exist, so...
That's it. Yeah, it's just massive, and when you look at the movies and John Wayne wailing that this man was the greatest man that ever lived, that is them into the Cavalry Hill in America, where every one of the pagans were culled, and Piso's so ruthless that he launches the false newsmen even to cover the Roman Empire. Obama at that time, have you heard of Field McConnell?
I have indeed, yes.
So Field went to school with Obama. His name was Barry Sutorio, and Suetonius is in the Bible, and he is one of Josephus's false newsmen, and that is the darkies that are in the movie that is The Gladiator, and talking about their gods. And Obama was Baruch, Saint Baruch, drowned in Cardiff Bay, and that is Cardiff Bay where the Gavin and Stacey comedies are filmed. They are massive villains. They are in the Star Wars team, and they have covered up the royal killings that were the Jack the Ripper murders. And my mate Greg Hallett told me all about that. He told the whole world all about it. So Prince Eddie was the Jack the Ripper rapist, and because the word Piso means vagina in translation, the vagina is the pie, that is the American pie for Don McLean in the Book of Love. And the reason that Jack the Ripper systematically cut out the fannies from his victims in those streets in London right next to the Bank of England in Cheapside, that is the royal serial killer that was Prince Eddie, and he then spent the rest of his life in Glamis Castle with blood on his hands, and he was unable to take up the kingdom, and the kingdom then fell into the hands of one of Queen Victoria's son, Edward VII, who's a bastard by the Churchills, I believe. He was the murderer of Marcus Manuel, and Marcus Manuel is in the Basil Fawlty comedies. There is a serial killer that got jailed in Scotland for serial killings called Manuel, Peter Manuel, and on the covers go. That is the Piso Polis that still shield the villains 2,000 years after the Bible was faked. And when I tell your audience what happened to the Piso residence when the Bible was faked there, that should get a lot of them thinking about the reality that Jesus never lived, but there is a massively powerful set of gods, or gods. I believe that it will be a team rather than an individual, and they have been totally replaced and demonized as the giants, which is why none of the actors live if they attempt to make the Don Quixote film that is about the giants, and that is Don Quixote dedicates the whole of his chivalrous life to trying to kill the gods that created us all.
The characters in
so what happened in so what happened in 79 AD when the Pisos released the New Testament, and huge chunks of it, was that their house in Naples, that was called, for a laugh, the Villa Papyrii, Vesuvius, right next door, erupted onto their home and buried it with, I think it was about 40 metres of lava. And that's why I'm God-fearing now, and that's why I get all my inspiration, like the pagan world, from the rising and setting sun. And every time you discover something really potent, like the Christmas story, the sun comes pouring down onto you. And it's really corny, but I am now a dedicated pagan.
Yes.
And the reason that Steve Jobs is a cover for Job in the Bible, he was God's greatest friend. And Steve Jobs died in his 50s, his widow died in her 40s, and it is absolutely dangerous not to be aware that those gods that created the beautiful universe that we still live in have been all around the world, and it is absolutely beautiful. I wasted most of my life in New Zealand in the fishing venues. All of it is beautiful, untainted, mountainous lands, but just as we were leaving, they were beginning to drain them, make them look like every farm in Western Europe. And that, I believe, is Richard Harris's film that he made in Ireland called The Field.
The Field, yeah.
You remember that? That was.
I do indeed. The cow going over the cliff.
So that is the the taming of God's universe and the taking over of the agricultural methodology, and that is in some of the Christmas jokes and the transition that you would sacrifice goats, and the sun god Saul's day of celebration was the 25th of December every year, and that happened right up until about the 3rd century, and then all of a sudden they made it an imposition that you could not deny that Jesus ever existed, and if you did, you would be crucified for it.
Right.
It's really quite sick, but when you look, and the British Royals have taken down those images of Julius Caesar's ancestors being Piso, the Villa Papyrii, and the eruption of Vesuvius from my front page of my website, because Kensington Palace is just below it, and that is KP and all of the Copernicus Piso jokes. If your initials are KP, you're in those world-owning bloodlines, and every letter in the alphabet, if it's got the letter I after it, becomes a world-leading family. It's part of their deviant protocols, but all of that is in Ralph Fiennes' outfit, and that's the I joke. It's just endless. When you learn the secrets, there's a Pi interest web page. Every article on that reveals the members. Yet the Getty images, the Gettys were the kings and queens of Rome, and that is John Paul Getty, the Forbes rich lister. Guess what he named his house?
Go on, Vesuvius.
No, the Villa Papyrii, after his greatest hero. And that is the biggest income stream that the world has ever known. It's the biggest cause of death. Donald's wife is Islamic. She's from Austro-Hungary, and that is the Austro-Hungarian River Valley that launched the murderous wars, and that is the Holy Roman Germans. Do you know why Miss Hall married Rupert Murdoch?
Jerry Hall.
Yeah.
Why would he? Well, she married Mick Jagger to start off with, so she's.
That's right. So she was the wife of Jagger, and Jagger is in the world-owning Sigismund Polish Holy Roman Jagiellonian dynasty. Yeah, that is Sigmund Freud. Yeah, in Donald's bloodline you've got dozens of Freuds. That is the links of them to Hitler, to Goring, and all of it. Yet Donald is out of Frankfurt am Main. That is Maine in America for the Bushes, and it is the Azure Blue song that is Rule Britannia. Rule Britannia. Britannia rules the Main. That is the joke, that since the Battle of the Boyne the Germans have been in charge, and the Queen's had to change her name again and again and again, and even Battenberg becomes Attenborough, and all of the bastards are in the Great Escape movie, and the other lot are in Colditz with their Batman, and everybody that has been in Colditz profiting as double agents in the war, God takes their limbs off.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the Duke of...
George, before you go on with the Christmas story that we are going to get, we have...
Have we still got time?
There's plenty of time. There's over half an hour. Okay? So, I'm hoping that you will take a couple more questions from the...
Yeah, please.
And I do apologise that the type of show that does do that... Delamitra is saying... now, let me see his question. He's actually asking about your IQ.
Oh, it's not very good. My wife's...
He says, if it's not impolite to ask, has George ever had his IQ measured? He holds amazing info.
We did a self-test when it was a BBC programme to determine that, and me and my kids and my wife had a go at it, and my eldest son and my wife were way ahead of me. She's got perfect memory.
Nice.
But no, I've never had it. But the IQ thing comes in to all the stories about the Stammering King. So he was an imbecile. He was incapable of having viable children. Two of his first attempts to have children with Bose Lion led to the departure of the real Bose Lion back up in, I can't remember whether it was Denmark or Sweden, but the woman that was the Queen Mother was from downstairs, and she is the whipping boy. They have body doubles for all of the royal officials and all the office bearers in case God catches up with them. So Bose Lion, that was the Queen Mother and so popular at the race meetings, she was actually a servant from downstairs. And it's just, and that was Greg Hallett that was murdered by the royals that told me that. And
has Greg Hallett been murdered?
In my estimation, he has. The new guy has totally dismembered his website. Every one of the hour-long videos that were carefully made with the pictures only survive now on my website. Get your friends to look at it as quickly as possible. I can't mind what the picture... So all the British royals and all the scams that they get into go right into the running of drugs with the Onassis family and Winston Churchill, and Onassis is married into the bloodlines for the Churchills and the Miller sisters in Greece and on and on and on it goes. And the Queen's babies, they were Princess Anne and Charlie Boy are the only legitimate children of Prince Philip, because he's such a sexual deviant that she left his bedroom after 2 years, and that was the siring of those two eldest kids. The other